see the houses on the other side of the ridge. The landowner, and by the way, I don't care who owns this land. That's not relevant to the conversation. What's relevant to the conversation is what does this protect? What do we give? We're paying the dollars on about $7,500 an acre, or whatever it is, for open space. And that is the land on the ridge, east of the ridge. Any questions? I'd be happy to.
You said that piece is 170 acres?
I think so, isn't it?
166.
And what's left?
About 30?
I can
He says.
answer that question.
Okay.
Or would you like me to do it now?
Well, I do have one more question for Art.
Sure.
I'm just trying to, I read your package and it was very well prepared. Thank you very much, because it really shed a lot of light on what we have to decide on tonight. But I'm still a little confused about the 31 cents. That's the amount of municipal services required to support that.
To support open space.
Open land.
Yeah.
But what are those municipal services? What is the town required to do?
For open space?
Yeah.
Practically nothing. You can almost do it by elimination of what you don't need. You don't need a school for open space. You don't need a fire truck for open space.
You don't need road
No.
crews
No,
for
you don't need anything.
plowing.
And that's
or-
why even
or
when
mowing.
land is taxed under PA 490, you still can't, it still contributes a positive number of dollars because
Right.
it requires nothing.
Right, I understand that. So the 31 cents in some cases for open space, would that be for maintenance of, say, hiking trails or,
No, no,
or-
I don't know that's a more detailed question than I can answer.
Okay.
Okay, but that number keeps coming up, and then some places it's 25 cents.
Yeah.
Okay, but it's always in the cents.
I am trying to get my arms around what could possibly cost 31 cents when you have a forested
I
tract
have
of
no
land.
idea. I have no idea. It might be liability insurance, and I just don't know.
Okay.
But the
Okay.
economist, I'm sure, could bore you to death with the answer. Okay.
Who's going to discuss the money issue here? Is that you or another gentleman?
Not
Okay.
me.
Okay.
Never finished my question about the 31 acres. You said there was 31 more acres to that parcel?
Right.
Do you have any more questions for Mr. Carlson?
Maybe later.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let me just give you a little background information on what the New England Forestry Foundation is.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
And inside there's a little two one-pagers. One talks about who we are and what our mission is. I've given you a summer newsletter. And that second page talks about how we manage the land that we actually own.
Now I'll introduce myself. My name is Whitney Beals. I'm the Director of Land Protection for New England Forestry Foundation. Our headquarters is in Littleton, Massachusetts. Last year we celebrated our 70th year of existence, so we're one of the oldest conservation groups in New England. We happen to own 150 community forests, which is what we call our ownerships scattered across New England. Some of them are here in Connecticut, a total of just over 600 acres. All those 150-odd community forests comprise about 26,000 acres total of land that we own outright. We also hold conservation easements on another 1.1 plus million acres of land, most of it being in Maine. We have a small staff in Littleton, 13 people now. Most of them are either managing properties or raising funds to keep us going. I got interested in this project through Mr. Harney, who contacted me because though we had a purchase and sales agreement with another land trust here in town, that other land trust was unable to come up with any funding. The reason that more funding is needed for the project is because of the $500,000 grant that Mr. Carlson mentioned. It was the maximum grant under that granting program. It actually came through before the new emphasis on keeping nitrogen out of Long Island Sound. And I think if we went back to the grant administrators today, we'd find that they were even happier than they were a couple of years ago when they made the award. That grant is in jeopardy because the governor has been making noises about trying to sweep any unexpended funds into the general account in Hartford. And that's why I've been working for a year now on trying to get the town to come to the table to share in the protection, share financially in the protection of this important parcel. New England Forestry Foundation is willing to make up and find the funds to make up the difference between the $500,000 and the $350,000, if that's what the town decides to put into the project. The sale price is $1.225 million, I believe. I'm hopeful of negotiating a lower purchase price. That's the appraised value. I'm hopeful of negotiating a lower purchase price with KSK Associates, which would be, in fact, a bargain sale, which would lower the amount that we have to find in order to get to closing on the project.
I'm sorry, excuse me, what did you say the appraised price was?
I think it was 1.225 in that neighborhood. And KSK has done 2 appraisals. They're willing to stick with that appraised value. Those appraisals actually were done when the real estate market was not robust. It's picked up. I think if we were to reappraise the property now, we'd find a higher value. The current project on the table is for 166 acres. Now, if the town were to put $350,000 into the project, that would be just under $2,200 an acre to protect the 166 acres. There are an additional 31 or 40 acres or so that KSK has held back from the transaction. I don't know if they are for sale. If they're for sale, it would mean finding more money to purchase those additional acres.
Could you just repeat what you said
Sure.
about the 40-acre piece?
The 40-acre piece is owned by KSK Associates. I
Mhm.
don't know if it's for sale. I've not talked to anybody about whether it should be part of the transaction or not, but most anything's negotiable, and it might become part of the transaction.
Where is that piece located on the
Lying
map?
to the west of the 166 acres. On the west side, it's this piece here. In here. Between the existing houses and 166 acres.
So it's essentially Goldfields Terrace area,
Yes, it is.
okay?
It just came kind of odd, 170 acres and they're holding back 30 or 40 acres. I don't understand why we wouldn't just sell you the whole piece.
Well, it may be that if the 166, if the owners feel that they're selling that at a bargain rate, that they'd like to, take some more profit out of their investment. I mean, any landowner's entitled to do that. But it's not part of the equation today. It's just the way the project seems to be coming together. So if you compare the $2,200 an acre that the town would be putting in for the $350,000 with the recent Darrow Pond acquisition, which was in the neighborhood of like $13,000 or $14,000 an acre, this is a real bargain. And it would be permanently protected because the stipulation of the state grant is that there has to be a permanent conservation easement put on the property. And that would be held jointly by the state of Connecticut, DEEP, and the town. And into that conservation easement, there would be written a guaranteed public access to a trail network. Now, the way the project is structured is that New England Forestry Foundation is proposing to be the owner and manager of the property, managing it in conjunction with a steering committee that we would put together of key stakeholders in the town. Either the conservation agency, would be the recreation agency, be the town education department, and any others that would want to participate in it. Our goal as an organization is to bring better forestry to New England, and we do that through our ownerships. All of those 150 odd community forests that we own are used as demonstration forests. We harvest them from time to time, but we harvest them under green certification. We're green certified by two separate auditing and I guess approval, green stamps of approval if you have it, the Forest Stewardship Council and the American Tree Farm System. We're audited on an annual basis about how we conduct our management activities. And so that there's no higher standard available or higher approval process available in the United States for the way we manage our properties. Why do we manage our properties that way? Because we need to get our wood products from somewhere. If you look around you, there are wood products in this room. Every day in North America, every citizen uses the equivalent of about 4 pounds of dried wood fiber. And it's coming from all over the globe. It's coming from a lot of non-sustainable operations. If we can bring that product line closer to the consumers and bring and source our products closer to the consumers, then we're reducing our global footprint, we're creating jobs in local economies, and we're doing a better job of managing our resources. It all can be done. Good forestry also means good water quality management. I mean, that's part of what the green certification process is all about. So we would be harvesting from time to time on this property. We'd look to the town to help with trail maintenance, volunteers, and have I missed any points I don't think I've missed any points that I wanted to make, but I'm certainly happy to address questions.
May I, Chair?
Certainly.
There was a gentleman at delegations who mentioned different requirements that the use of the property, all-terrain vehicles and hunting and.
Thank you.
Could you address an example of what type of easement you think that would be going on this property? I know that there's 3 parties involved, but.
Yes. We would discourage the use of any vehicles on the property except those that are necessary for forest management purposes, unless there's a compelling reason for there to be a snowmobile trail on the property, which we do allow on many of our properties farther north. We discourage ATV and trail bike use on all our properties. It's hard to manage those uses on some of our properties because many of them are very remote. I don't think that would be the case here. I think the word would get out pretty quickly that if it's an ATV track now, that's not going to be an ATV track in the future. There was on hunting. Hunting would be allowed in a conservation easement, but I think in working with a steering committee at the town level, we'd figure out whether hunting was appropriate or not. We do allow hunting on almost all of our properties. We did accept a handful years ago where the donors of the property, outright gifts, really wanted to have no hunting. So we put up the no hunting signs. We can't enforce that. And as you may be aware, there are many places in Connecticut where the overabundance of the white-tailed deer is a huge threat to our future forests and a threat to public health. So that's why we like to keep the hunting option open. Some Massachusetts town, we don't allow the use of firearms, except for archery equipment. And actually, it's confusing because in Massachusetts, bows and arrows are considered firearms. So, but for safety reasons, we don't allow the discharge of a shoulder-mounted, firearm. With respect to liability, there's a limited liability statute here in Connecticut, so that the landowner, anybody in this room, if you allow the general public to use your property without charging a fee or without being negligent, then you're not liable for any injury that anybody on your property might suffer. It might go to court, somebody might try to sue, your homeowner's insurance policy will cover that, and the case will get thrown out.
That being said, though, your organization would have
Yes.
comprehensive liability insurance.
Absolutely, that's correct. Yes, we do.
When you use the word, you would discourage the use of ATVs, dirt bikes, etc. You're going to own the property.
Yes.
The town is going to hold an easement to the property.
Right.
If your steering committee says we're not going to allow ATVs, dirt bikes, etc., then whose job is it to police that? The owner of the property or the easement people?
I would see that maybe as a shared responsibility between the steering committee and ourselves. Like I say, we're a staff of 13. It's hard for us to be.
Well, how do you manage that on your other properties?
We put up signs,
But
and we
enforcing-
actually have, in some cases, a very small number of cases, we actually have steering committees that help us, friends of the forest committees. In other cases, we have over 80 forest stewards who are volunteers who look at our properties, keep an eye on them, and try to discourage illegal uses. It's hard.
Yeah, I can see that.
And it waxes and wanes. I mean, my experience with trail bikes and ATVs is that somebody in the neighborhood's got a couple of machines, and then somebody else gets one, and they run around for a while, and they get tired of them, or somebody gets hurt, or they grow older, and they go off to college, and the bikes and the ATVs disappear for a while.
So this isn't something the town would police?
No, I wouldn't expect that unless the town were asked to do that. I
By
don't-
who?
Well, by the landowner or by the steering committee, I would think. And just in terms of writing into the conservation easement a possible prohibition against the use of those kinds of machines, I don't know of a single instance, and I know of many instances where that kind of language is in a conservation easement, and yet if the easement holder is not held accountable for enforcing it, because it's just such an impossible task.
In Art's letter to the Board of Selectmen, he talked about something that Ms. Johnson talked about, was, I assume that he means Route 11. If in the future this land is involved in, say, eminent domain issues, each party could, I hate words like could, I love words like shall, get the percentage back it originally invested. Do we see that as a possibility?
Sure, and that would be written into the conservation easement as a shall.
Okay.
I've drafted many conservation easements, and it's standard language in an easement, that if there's an eminent domain proceeding, then the landowner and the easement holder are compensated in the percentage that's established at the beginning of the project. So,
I also have a question on Steve's 37 or 40 acres. Suppose, there's houses being built there right now on Goldfinch Terrace.
okay.
At least one. I live there. I don't live on Goldfinch Terrace. I live below it. If on those 40 acres they were split into 80 half-acre properties and houses built, then does the protection for Long Island Sound decrease?
Well, it wouldn't be as great as if those 40 acres weren't built on, that's for sure.
Let me make a comment on that. Part of the drainage is not into that watershed. Not
So the western
It's on the other
side of
side
the
of the ridge.
drainage does,
the western side would go.
because it's below the ridge.
Yes. that's
It's
right.
not as important, put it that way.
But on the other hand, if there was a house in this watershed that Alsagachi is, it would be a very limited number of houses, and I've got all that soil to grab up, to grab the nitrogen and the storage. Okay, I've got 100+ acres to hold it. So it's not perfect, but it's a lot better than 80 houses snuggled down in the valley. That's basically.
Well, yeah, and the reason I said divide it up into half-acre properties is you mentioned the word, if they build 80 houses up there. And so you were specifically talking about the other side of the ridge, and if you build the houses on the western side, then it becomes not detrimental to Long Island Sound or less detrimental?
Much less than if you built it on the east side. Because that hill just, you know, if you go up there, the drainage is away from Long Island Sound on the west side.
It eventually gets there, but it's not as direct.
Well, I guess the alternative is if this is not open space, if the rest of it isn't open space, then you could have a lot more houses built up there. However,
That's right.
how easy is it to build a house? If you go up the end of Goldfish Terrace right now and look out, there's huge boulders where parts of where it's been blasted, okay? Or they've been removed by now. So, is it easier to build houses on the west side than it is on the east side because of the ledge properties, or do you know that answer? And my other question is the logging. The gentleman that spoke during delegation, the only entrance that I know of is across the street from his house. Do the logging trucks come out there, and how often? What's the traffic? And when you come out there, you immediately start down a very steep hill.
I think that some of those details are very important and all will be negotiated. I think there always has to be good access for forest management purposes. There has to be really good access for public recreation purposes. So if in fact the 40 acres don't become part of the project, I think it's incumbent on the planning board to make sure that there's a granted at least a trail access across the 40 acres so that people, you know, are not limited in terms of their access points to the 166 acres.
That was one of my concerns, access for the public.
Right.
If those 40 acres are developed, how does anyone get access? And I'm all for it, but sometimes people can't even use the land that's
Like-
open space.
Like I suggested, I think people have to be very watchful and make sure that the planning board doesn't approve a plan that shuts people off from accessing the 166 acres through those 40 acres now.
In addition to access, I'm really concerned about utilization. So if there are to be walking trails or cross-country skiing trails, who actually would fund that? Is that something that would come out of the proceeds from your logging operation?
If necessary, yes, and we would put that into the overall project budget and raise funds for that, for the startup costs for doing that. And if in fact we had an active there was a question about how often might there be an active forest harvesting operation out there. No more frequently than every 10 years and probably less than that. Probably once every 15 years would be my guess. That depends upon what the forest management plan might say. I should explain what we do when we acquire a property. We go in and do a full natural resources inventory on, you know, what's there, are there sensitive habitats, is there anything on the state list of you know, rare or threatened or endangered species. If there are, then we account for those in our management planning. And we go through and inventory the forest resources. And this will all be done by a consulting forester, probably not somebody on our staff, probably somebody who's more familiar with Connecticut than we are up in Littleton, Massachusetts. And come up with a prescription for how to manage that property. But included in a very important component of that plan will be managing the public resource, the public access, the recreational resource. So it all gets wrapped into a plan and well vetted with a steering committee, you know, before it's put in final form.
Could you give us just a brief example, and maybe for those watching on TV, what these easements may contain?
They contain, they're, until you get familiar with them, and even then, they're complicated documents. They start off with a series of statements, whereas clauses, you know, why land is important, why it's a public benefit to protect it for the following reasons: you know, watershed protection, wildlife habitat, forest resources, public recreation, so on and so forth. And then there's a list of things that are prohibited, which would include, you know, any residential structures. You might want to reserve the right for an educational facility out there, or a warming hut, you know, for skiers, for instance. That can be done. But there'd be a whole list of prohibitions, most any commercial activity would be prohibited, unless somebody can think of a good reason to hold one back. Wind generation usually is prohibited, and that's pretty much the list. And then there's a section that says all of that's prohibited except for the following things which are allowed. And there you make the statements about public trails and perhaps retaining the right to put in small structure or two for recreational purposes, and forest management as long as it's done and according to best management practices, and those kinds of things. There's a list of things that you can't do, then a list of things that the reserved rights clause, it's called, clauses, and then there's a whole lot of legal language in a various number of clauses that talk about what happens if something goes wrong, and who's going to pay and all that. So there's all of that's covered.
Who pays for the legal services for this?
We would work that into the budget. You would want to have town council review any. I generally draft a conservation easement document. It's cheap for me to do it. I've done a lot of them, and then always encourage the other side of the table to have council look at it.
So these easements are agreed upon by the owner and the town?
Correct.
Okay.
And DEEP would have input as well,
And the
obviously.
state.
Yes.
Okay, in the state.
Right.
And that may be the answer to this question. The Connecticut Siting Council seems to be able to do whatever they want. Such as, I want to put a cell tower here. Because the DEP now is part of this, is there anything in this easement that
Put no cell towers.
tells those guys that no matter who you are, Connecticut Siting Council, you can't put one here?
There could be a statement that no cell towers or no communication towers are allowed. Now, what that does,
How do you
with
hold
respect
up-
to the siting council, I don't know. I don't know Connecticut law.
They could trump that,
I
probably.
think they could probably trump it, but then it would be an eminent domain proceeding, and there would be some compensation
Right.
for doing that taking. Yeah.
Okay.
But I would think that with DEEP involved, it would discourage the siting council from selecting a site like this one.
And certainly negotiate that in there.
We do the best we can.
So the asking price is 1.225.
I believe so.
All right.
So-
The grant is 500,
Correct.
which would be 725 left, roughly.
Right.
You're asking the town to kick in 350.
Correct.
So that means you guys would pick up 375.
Yes.
What's our balance in the open space fund? Do you know?
It's
Okay.
It's obviously greater than 350.
yes.
Around 533, does that sound about right? A little more than 500?
I think that's right.
Just backing out what we've recently approved with the Bay Ruther property as well as the Torrance settlement, we use that account to settle
Yes.
the Torrance claim.
Right, I remember that.
So if I go back to about a year ago, there's about 900,000 in that account.
That's right.
We took out 25 for Bay Ruther, 350 for the Torrance settlement, which leaves us still in excess of 500. Also, the CIP plan that was approved looks like it's adding back 250 per year. And I don't know how that works. That's not an automatic funding. Does that
No.
come before us?